The mansion, with its polished floors and vaulted silence, had long stood immune to chaos. But that night, it cracked. A baby's cry tore through the Carter estate like a flare in the dark, sharp, primal, and ceaseless. For more than 3 hours, the sound had echoed relentlessly, ricocheting off marble columns, climbing the spiral staircase, and settling like fog in every untouched corner of the grand house. Downstairs, in the glinting kitchen where chandeliers hung like frozen stars, Isabella Torres hunched over the same square of floor for the 4th time. Her knees ached against the stone. Her rag moved in tight, mechanical circles, though the surface was spotless. She was 24. Her hands bore the wear of long hours and forgotten dignity. Her eyes, usually dim with fatigue, now flicked upward every few minutes, toward the ceiling. She wasn't just tired. She was unraveling. 6 weeks ago, Isabella had buried her newborn son. He had lived just long enough to open his eyes, take a few trembling breaths, and slip away before the world could make a space for him. Since then, the sound of a baby's cry, any baby, had become unbearable. But this wasn't just any cry. This one was happening above her head, louder with each passing second, and no one was doing anything. This baby, she murmured under her breath, barely audible over the wails. He's going to cry himself sick. Still, her hand pressed harder on the floor, as if scrubbing could drown it all out. The grief, the helplessness, the rising panic. Upstairs, 6-week-old Ethan Carter lay in his crib, body flushed, mouth open in a mute, exhausted scream. His lips were cracked, his skin damp with sweat, his arms twitching aimlessly. The bottle beside him, abandoned hours earlier, reeked of curdled formula. Spoiled in the summer heat, it had become a symbol of neglect. The nanny was gone. Melissa Adams, 28, had been hired through a high-end agency. Her credentials were polished. Her smile was practiced. But 6 hours ago, she'd stepped out with a casual, just grabbing some specialty formula, and hadn't returned. She was currently trying on sunglasses in a luxury boutique, sipping an iced drink with friends who laughed too loudly. Ethan was, to her, a footnote, a temporary paycheck with diapers. And on the first floor, behind a thick walnut door, Daniel Carter tried to pretend he couldn't hear. He sat at his desk, home office turned war room, leaning into a glowing screen, surrounded by charts, reports, and video tiles filled with distant executives speaking fast Japanese. At 35, he was CEO of a rapidly expanding tech firm. Since his wife's death during childbirth, he'd lived mostly in that chair. His eyes, bloodshot and ringed with fatigue, drifted toward a framed photograph to his left. Claire, smiling, 8 months pregnant. Still alive in that picture. Still everything. A sharp voice from the screen jarred him. "Mr. Carter, can we confirm the investment timeline?" Daniel nodded automatically, lips moving with the efficiency of someone used to functioning on autopilot. "Yes, absolutely. Full commitment from our side." But his attention faltered again. In the distance, through walls, through distractions, his son was still crying. That sound had not stopped. Not for a minute. He clenched his jaw and focused back on the numbers. It was easier to chase deals than face grief. Easier to calculate risk than hold a baby who reminded him of everything lost. But not everyone in the house could look away. In the kitchen, Isabella had stopped scrubbing. Her hands trembled. Her chest rose and fell in erratic rhythm. She pressed her palms against the floor, then stood abruptly. Her breath was short. Her face pale. She didn't decide to go upstairs. Her body did. Some decisions bypassed thought entirely. Her steps were fast, barefoot against the hardwood. She took the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering in her ribs, mouth dry. "Please, God," she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. "Don't let anything happen to this baby." She pushed the nursery door open and froze. Ethan lay limp in his crib, eyes half shut, limbs twitching. His cheeks were burning. His skin was clammy. His mouth moved weakly, searching. Isabella stepped forward in a daze. She picked him up, holding him against her chest. He felt too hot. He smelled of stale milk and sweat. His body was feather-light, but his presence hit her like a weight. She looked around. The bottle on the nightstand was useless. The crib sheets were damp with sweat. The room was stifling. Ethan cried again, this time a soft, broken sound, as if even his pain was fading. And then it happened. For 6 weeks, Isabella's body had continued its betrayal. Her milk hadn't dried. Each morning, she woke with aching breasts, with nothing and no one to feed. She had tried pills, compresses, prayer. Nothing worked. Now, as she held this abandoned child, her body reacted without permission. Her blouse was damp. Her heart felt like it was being peeled open. She didn't think. She couldn't. She sat in the armchair by the window, lowered her blouse with shaking fingers, and pressed Ethan gently to her chest. He latched instantly, and everything went still. The cries stopped. His breathing slowed. His tiny fingers clutched at her shirt as if grabbing the edge of a cliff. His whole body softened. His jaw moved with purpose, his mouth suckling hungrily, rhythmically, like instinct reborn. Isabella stared down at him, lips trembling. Tears slid silently down her face. Not loud sobs. Not the grief of fresh loss. Something deeper. Something older. Like a dam quietly cracking after a long drought. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "It's okay now, little one. You're safe." The room dimmed with evening light. Outside, the sun dipped below the treetops. Inside, there was just a woman who had lost a child, and a child who had almost been lost. They found each other in silence. But peace, in that house, was always temporary. The door creaked open. Daniel stood on the threshold. He didn't speak. Not right away. He didn't even breathe. His eyes took in the scene. Isabella in the armchair, blouse unbuttoned, Ethan nestled at her chest, drinking quietly, cheeks no longer red but flushed with life. The light from the window cast a golden halo around them. It looked like a painting. It felt like betrayal. What are you doing?" Daniel's voice was hoarse, disoriented, cracking under the weight of too many emotions. Isabella jolted. She instinctively covered herself, clutching Ethan protectively, eyes wide with panic. "Sir, I can explain," she stammered. Daniel stepped forward, his eyes not leaving her. He should have been furious, and a part of him was. But another part, quieter, deeper, was stunned by the silence in the room. Ethan, who hadn't stopped crying for days, was sleeping now, peacefully, safely, completely calm. That realization left him paralyzed. The moment held its breath. Isabella, still holding Ethan, bowed her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but the bottle was spoiled. He was burning up. I couldn't let him suffer. I didn't plan it. It just happened." Daniel didn't answer. His hands trembled at his sides. His son was safe. His son was quiet. And yet, his mind still reeled from what he had walked into. The blurred lines. The rules broken. The intimacy of it. He left the room without a word. But the silence had changed. The mansion, for the first time in a long while, had heard the sound of life returning. Isabella didn't sleep that night. She sat by the nursery window long after Ethan had drifted into a deep, contented sleep. The mansion, at last, was quiet. But the quiet didn't feel safe. It felt like the silence before a verdict. She knew she had crossed a line no one ever draws in ink, but everyone expects you to see. She wasn't his mother. She wasn't family. She was a maid. And she had done something no one would understand. She hadn't done it to be noble. She had done it because a baby was starving. And because her body hadn't forgotten how to be a mother, even if the world had taken her child. Ethan stirred against her, a soft noise, a flutter of trust. His hand rested near her collarbone. She closed her eyes and let herself feel it for just a moment longer. Just this once. But she knew this moment wouldn't last. And she was right. The storm arrived by evening. Melissa returned around sunset, arms heavy with shopping bags and excuses. "Sorry, the pharmacy was out of stock. I had to go to another one," she said, breezing past Daniel with the ease of someone used to getting away with things. She didn't notice, or pretended not to notice, the tension hanging in the air like smoke. Daniel didn't confront her. Not yet. He simply watched. But Isabella? She said nothing. She kept her head down, stayed invisible, even as Melissa threw suspicious glances her way. Something in the air had shifted, and by the next morning, it was everywhere. The whispers. They started in the kitchen. One of the cleaners, overhearing something from Melissa. The maid breastfed Mr. Carter's baby. From there, it spread like fire through dry grass. Neighbors called. "Have you heard? That maid. She fed the baby herself. It's not normal. It's not safe." A voice on speakerphone, Patricia from across the street. One of those women who turn gossip into a civic duty clucked her tongue. Daniel, dear, I don't want to intrude, but people are talking. They say she's become attached, obsessive even. Poor thing. She lost her baby, didn't she? These things can warp the mind. Daniel stared out the window, phone pressed to his ear, jaw tight. Patricia, he said slowly, thank you for your concern. But I don't base my decisions on rumors. Oh, of course, she replied sweetly. Just thought you should know. He hung up before she could say more. But the damage had begun. The weight of judgment fell fast and heavy. Not just from neighbors, but from his own conscience. He had seen the way Isabella held Ethan. Not possessively, not out of delusion, but with instinct, pure, unfiltered instinct. And his son, who had refused every bottle, every hand but hers, was now smiling, sleeping, thriving. Still, doubt clawed at him. She broke protocol, whispered one voice. She saved your child, whispered another. By the end of the week, he made his decision. He called her into the office. Isabella stepped in, shoulders tense, eyes hollow. She didn't sit. She didn't speak first. Daniel looked at her, then at his desk. The words tasted bitter before they even left his mouth. You're dismissed. Her breath caught. Sir, please. Just let me say goodbye to Ethan. He didn't answer. Couldn't. She turned away, eyes burning, lips pressed together to stop the sobs. She left the mansion in the pouring rain, a single canvas bag slung over her shoulder. No umbrella, no cab, no destination. From the window, Daniel watched her disappear beyond the iron gates. He said nothing. But that night, Ethan wouldn't sleep. He cried for hours, rejecting bottles, screaming until his tiny lungs gave out. Daniel tried to comfort him, held him, rocked him, whispered every soothing phrase he could remember. Nothing worked. By dawn, Ethan had fallen into an exhausted, tearless sleep. Daniel stood over the crib, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. Guilt gnawed at his ribs. The days that followed brought no improvement. Ethan wouldn't eat. He lost weight. His cheeks sank. His once bright eyes grew dull. Daniel hired a nurse. Then another. Then a third. All specialists. All baffled. Physically, he's not sick, one said, shaking her head. But something is wrong. This is emotional. Daniel blinked. Emotional? He's an infant. He's a human, the nurse replied. Infants form bonds. If they lose them, they grieve. That word hit like a punch. Grieve. Daniel stood frozen in the nursery, staring at his pale, whimpering son. The thought that a 6-week-old could experience loss, he hadn't allowed himself to believe it. But now it made sense. He remembered Isabella's touch. Her voice. The way Ethan had quieted in her arms as if he'd known her in another life. He tried to brush it away. Tried to convince himself it was coincidence. But deep down he knew. He had made a mistake. A devastating one. 3 days later, Ethan was admitted to the hospital. He was severely dehydrated. His body had entered a state of nutritional stress. The doctors inserted in 4, monitored his vitals. But even there, in a sterile crib, surrounded by machines, he wouldn't eat. Daniel paced the hospital corridors, torn between helplessness and self-loathing. He returned to the mansion once, to grab clothes, a charger, some documents. And that's when he saw her. Melissa, in the backyard, handing a small box of medication to a man in a hoodie. This one's pricey, she whispered. Should go for at least $300. Daniel watched from the sliding door, breath gone. The man handed her a wad of cash. And Daniel snapped. He stormed into the yard. Melissa, what the hell is this? She turned, startled. Mr. Carter, you're selling my son's medication? Her excuses stumbled out. Something about her mother being sick, needing money. But Daniel wasn't listening. How long? He asked coldly. She didn't answer. He stepped closer. How long have you been stealing from us? Melissa's face crumpled. The truth fell out in broken sobs. I lied about Isabella. I made it up. I was afraid you'd fire me. She never meant harm. She saved him. And I got jealous. Daniel stood in silence. Everything inside him hollowed out. The image of Isabella in the rain. Ethan's peaceful face in her arms. The days she spent unnoticed, unthanked. The way he cast her out without a word of defense. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. I made a mistake, he whispered. The biggest mistake of his life. The mansion was quiet again, but not in the peaceful way. This silence was different. Heavier. It hung in the halls like regret. Even the air felt colder. Daniel sat in the same chair where he'd dismissed Isabella. He hadn't moved in hours. Melissa's confession echoed in his head like a broken record. She saved him. I made it up. The pieces fell into place, one by one, with surgical clarity. Ethan had thrived in Isabella's arms. Not just fed, but comforted. Safe. That bond had meant something. And Daniel, blinded by pride, by fear of public opinion, by the whispering vultures of high society, had destroyed it. He had chosen image over instinct. The pain of that truth wasn't abstract. It was tangible, physical, like an anchor dragging down his ribs. And his son, his only son, was withering because of it. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Not at the hospital. Not at home. He kept seeing Isabella walking away in the rain. No coat. No umbrella. Only a bag of cheap fabric and the look of someone being quietly erased. He had no idea where she was, but he intended to find her. The next morning, he started with the boarding house where she used to rent a room. The landlady answered the door with a cigarette in one hand and apathy in the other. Gone 3 weeks now, she said. Left owing rent. Just walked off with that sad little bag. Daniel nodded, handed her cash anyway. If she shows up again, call me. She didn't ask who he was. The rich didn't usually need introductions. From there, he went to employment offices, community clinics, local churches. Every place gave him the same answer. No record, no sign, no trace. She could be anywhere, said one social worker. There are hundreds of women like her. Once they fall out of the system, they disappear. And she had. For 4 days, Daniel searched. He wandered into places he had once only passed with tinted windows. Homeless shelters, soup lines, alleys beneath bridges. At night, he drove aimlessly through the city, peering into corners, asking questions. He was met mostly with suspicion. You a cop? A man growled outside a shelter. No, I'm just looking for someone. He showed photos, described her voice, her walk, her kindness. But to those on the street, Isabella was just another ghost. Until the 5th day, he was back at the hospital when his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He picked up without thinking. A woman's voice spoke. Mr. Carter? This is Monica. I live in the next district. I think. I saw her. The girl from the papers. Isabella. She looked sick. Like she hadn't eaten in days. She was walking near Avenida Caracas. I wasn't sure it was her until now. Daniel was already standing. He scribbled the address and bolted. He combed the entire avenue for hours. Walked into every alley, under every awning, past every bench. Nothing. Dusk fell. The shadows stretched. His legs ached. He stood by the curb, face in his hands, the guilt almost unbearable. And then the phone rang again. A gravelly voice. Older. Slow. You're the one looking for Isabella? Daniel nearly dropped the phone. Yes. Yes, please. Do you know where she is? My name's Howard. I've been living under that bridge she ended up near. She doesn't talk much, but she's not well. Girl's barely breathing. Why are you looking for her? Daniel hesitated. His voice cracked. Because my son is dying, and she's the only one who can save him. There was a pause. Then the man gave him the location. But listen to me. If you hurt her again, we won't let it slide. Understand? Daniel's voice broke. I won't. I swear. He drove like a man possessed. Under the Avenida Caracas bridge, the city's glamour vanished. Moss climbed up the stone pillars. Trash rustled in the wind. The night smelled of exhaust and old rain. Daniel's headlights caught the outline of people huddled together for warmth. Blankets. Cardboard. Eyes that had seen too much. And then he saw her, curled in the shadows. Isabella. She sat against the wall, knees drawn up, a torn blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair hung in clumps, her skin pale, her cheeks hollow, her lips dry. Her body shook with an occasional cough. Wet, raw, exhausted. Daniel stepped into the cold. She looked up and flinched. She recoiled like an animal expecting pain. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. Just stared at him with those dark, emptied-out eyes. What are you doing here? She rasped, her voice almost gone. Daniel stopped a few feet away, hands raised. Please, just listen. She didn't answer. My son, he said, voice shaking. He's in the hospital. He's not eating. The doctors, they say it's emotional. That he's grieving. He needs you. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. It hurt her throat. I already saved him, she whispered. And what did I get? He said nothing. I lost everything. She continued, her words trembling. My home, my job, my reputation, because I fed a child who was starving. And you threw me out like garbage. I was wrong, Daniel said. I was so wrong. He knelt in the dirt, his expensive clothes soaking up the filth of the street. I can't take it back, he said. But I can beg. Not for me. For him. For the first time, her face cracked. The mention of Ethan did what his apologies couldn't. Her eyes flickered with something. Grief. Yes, but also fear. Concern. A memory. She closed her eyes. A long breath. Then a nod. I'll come, she said. But only for him. Daniel lowered his head. That's all I ask. The hospital corridor was hushed when they arrived. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Daniel held the door open for Isabella, who stepped through like someone returning to a world that had already spat her out once. She looked different now. Not cleaner, not healthier, but clearer. Her eyes had that sharp edge that comes from being broken and not quite healed. She didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She moved like a woman on a mission. They entered the room. Ethan lay motionless in the crib, his skin pale, cheeks sunken, his tiny limbs too still for comfort. A nurse hovered nearby, adjusting the four-line, while a doctor spoke quietly into a recorder. Isabella didn't wait. She walked straight to the crib. Ethan, she whispered. The child stirred. His eyelids fluttered. A soft noise escaped his lips, a whimper, faint but familiar. His head turned toward her voice like a sunflower following light. Then he saw her, or felt her. Somehow, even in that dazed, semi-conscious state, something clicked. A tiny smile, more reflex than joy, tugged at his lips. Isabella leaned down, arms trembling. She lifted him gently, cradling his fragile body to her chest. He didn't resist. No crying, no panic, just a slow, broken sigh, like a baby exhaling relief after days of confusion. He nestled into her, and the room went silent. Even the machines seemed to pause. The nurses stared. One of them touched her own face and found she was crying. Daniel stood by the door, watching the scene as if through water. He felt everything and nothing at once. Guilt, awe, shame, something resembling hope. Ethan was no longer rejecting touch, no longer arching his back in pain. He was simply home. The doctors would later call it a turning point. Physiological stabilization through emotional reconnection. They said in clipped tones, noting it in their charts. But none of their words captured what truly happened. The boy simply remembered the arms that had once saved him. Isabella didn't let go for hours. When she finally laid Ethan back into the crib, he was asleep, peaceful, breathing evenly. She didn't turn to Daniel. She didn't need to. Her focus never left the child. Later that evening, as the hospital lights dimmed and monitors beeped softly in the background, Daniel approached her. She sat in the chair beside the crib, her clothes still damp from the rain earlier, her hair tangled, her face drawn. But her presence, solid, grounded, was what held the room together. Isabella, Daniel said quietly. She didn't look up. I just wanted to say, thank you, for coming back, for saving him. Again. Her voice was hoarse. I didn't come back for you. He nodded. I know. Silence sat between them, thick and necessary. In the following days, Ethan improved. He began feeding again, slowly at first, then with appetite. He responded to Isabella's voice, her touch, her scent. His vitals strengthened. Color returned to his face. The doctors withdrew the four. Emotionally triggered malnutrition, one pediatrician said. But now, he's healing. Daniel stayed close. He brought coffee for Isabella in the mornings, sat beside her in silence, answered hospital questions, signed forms. But he didn't ask for anything. Not forgiveness. Not understanding. He simply showed up. On the fifth day, Isabella said. He smiled in his sleep. Daniel nodded, afraid to speak too soon. A week later, Ethan was cleared for discharge. As they wheeled him out of the hospital, Daniel and Isabella walked side by side, not speaking, not holding hands, but tethered by something more complex. Outside, the media waited. Rumors had spread. The whispers, the scandal, the nanny fired for theft. Someone leaked the hospital report. The public was curious. Daniel didn't hide. He stepped forward and called a press conference. I want to make something very clear, he said into the microphones. Isabella Torres saved my son's life. Twice. Every rumor, every assumption made about her character is false. She was unjustly dismissed. And I was wrong. It was short, direct, sincere. The media spun it into a redemption arc. Melissa became the villain of the story. Tabloids tore her apart. Neighbors who once whispered now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Those who'd gossiped at tea parties found themselves oddly quiet. As for Isabella, she said nothing. She simply focused on Ethan. A week passed. Then two. Daniel offered her a room in the mansion, not as a maid, but as a guest. She hesitated. I don't want charity, she said. It's not charity, Daniel replied. It's a second chance. She moved into a guest wing, simple, quiet, with a view of the garden. Ethan began laughing again, reaching for toys, crawling toward her voice. And slowly, something shifted. They started sharing small responsibilities. Feeding schedules, walks in the garden, bath time. The space between them became less sharp, less defined. One evening, Daniel stood at the window holding Ethan. Isabella sat on the rug, folding a blanket. The room smelled of baby powder and quiet peace. I still don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I want to make things right. She didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. And that was something. Time passed. Isabella stayed. Not as staff, not as a tenant, but something in between. Daniel stopped working late. He started cooking. Badly at first. Burnt toast. Overcooked pasta. But Ethan laughed every time he tried, and Isabella, though she never said it aloud, smiled more often than not. On a quiet weekend, Daniel took them both to the park. It was the same park where Isabella had once wandered alone, broke and invisible. Now there was a picnic blanket, a thermos of tea, and Ethan babbling happily on the grass. At one point, Daniel pulled something from his pocket. A small box. Isabella blinked. What's that? He opened it. Inside was a ring. Simple. Gold. No diamonds. Just light, catching metal. He didn't kneel. He didn't recite a speech. He simply said, I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you walk away once. I don't want to make it again. You've become the mother Ethan needs. And the woman I never stop thinking about. If you can give me a chance, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. Isabella stared at the ring, then at him, then at Ethan, who sat in the grass, clapping his hands at a butterfly. Tears welled, not from sadness, not entirely from joy, but from something quieter, something hard to name. She nodded and whispered, yes. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger. Ethan crawled toward them, babbling nonsense, then collapsed into Isabella's lap with a laugh. They sat there, man, woman, child, surrounded by light, by grass, by things that grow slowly but survive. They weren't perfect, but they were together. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again. Time, as it does, moved forward. And the mansion that had once echoed with loneliness began to sound different. The walls, still lined with expensive art, now held laughter. Soft footsteps. The irregular rhythm of a child's giggle trailing through rooms once defined by silence. Isabella didn't become Mrs. Carter overnight. There was no grand rebranding, no tabloid wedding, no staged appearances. She remained quiet, observant, careful, but she stayed. And Daniel didn't rush her. He learned, slowly, to live in the present, to hold Ethan without thinking of how much Claire would have loved to see him crawl, to sit across from Isabella at dinner and not drown in apologies. They became a family not by declaration, but by repetition, by the daily acts that bind people, shared meals, midnight feedings, toy cleanups, scraped knees. And through all of it, Ethan grew. It was Ethan who built the bridge between them, one giggle at a time. Neighbors, once judgmental, now murmured in softer tones. Some offered half-hearted apologies. Others baked pies they left at the gate with notes. But Isabella never sought validation. She didn't need public redemption. She had something more valuable, her life back. Daniel converted one of the mansion's unused wings into a nursery and a small study for Isabella. She filled it not with luxury, but with practical things, children's books, woven baskets, a chair that didn't squeak. He noticed, once, that she always left one corner of the shelf empty. He never asked why. One day, Daniel handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a notarized document, a fund in her name, no strings attached. For security, he said. She read the paper silently, then looked up. "You think I'll leave again?" "I think you deserve the choice," he replied. She didn't sign anything. She simply folded it and tucked it into a drawer. Ethan turned 1. They held a quiet gathering, just the three of them, a tiny cake, and a single candle that refused to light in the breeze. Isabella finally laughed aloud that day. Not the polite, restrained kind. A full laugh. And Daniel, startled by the sound, realized he had never heard it before. A month later, she stood beside him in court as he filed formal adoption papers. She didn't need to. He had full custody. But he insisted, "You're his mother, and the world should know it." She signed without hesitation, and Ethan, perched in her arms, dribbled apple puree down her shoulder as if sealing the deal. Life, at last, found rhythm. But memory is a stubborn guest. It doesn't leave just because you're building something new. One night, Isabella stood on the balcony, holding Ethan close. The moonlight turned his hair silver. She watched the city breathe beneath them and whispered, "You saved me too, little one. You don't know it, but you did." Daniel joined her a moment later, standing beside her without a word. After a long silence, he asked, "Do you ever think about him? Your son?" She nodded. "Every day, but not the way I used to." He didn't push further. Grief, he had learned, doesn't need resolution. It only needs space. Eventually, they married. Quietly. A courthouse. 2 witnesses. No photographers. Ethan wore a bow tie he refused to keep straight. Isabella wore a dress that had no designer name. They didn't exchange grand vows. Just a look. One that said, "We know what it took to get here." And that was enough. Years passed. Ethan started preschool. Daniel scaled back his business hours. Spent more time in the garden. Learned how to fry eggs without burning them. Badly. Isabella took online courses in early childhood education. Not because she needed the certification, but because she wanted to understand what children needed beyond survival. She eventually opened a small daycare in the mansion's guest house, free for children of staff and struggling single parents nearby. They called it the Little Branch. She didn't advertise, didn't brand, just opened the door. Word spread. Meanwhile, Daniel watched from the sidelines as the woman the world had once shunned quietly became a lifeline to others. He found himself staring at her sometimes, not with infatuation, but with something harder to define. Respect. Gratitude. Love, yes, but the kind that builds slow and deep, with roots. Then came the unexpected letter. An invitation. From the mayor's office. The city was recognizing community advocates for child welfare. And Isabella Torres was one of them. She almost threw it away. "I don't want a plaque," she said. "I don't want attention." Daniel raised a brow. "Maybe it's not about wanting. Maybe it's about letting people know stories like yours exist." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. At the ceremony, she wore a pale blue dress. Daniel held Ethan's hand as they walked into the hall. No red carpet. No paparazzi. Just applause. Real, slow, respectful applause. Isabella didn't make a speech. She just accepted the award and whispered, "Thank you." But the city took notice. Not just of her story, but of the possibility it represented. Later that year, Daniel proposed building a small foundation in Ethan's name, something to support vulnerable mothers, displaced caregivers, and children caught in bureaucratic limbo. Isabella agreed. On one condition. "We don't name it after Ethan," she said. "We name it after the forgotten ones." So they did. It opened 2 years later. A modest 2-story building near the river. It had no donor walls, no gilded lobby. Just clean rooms, trained staff, and open doors. On the front, in metal letters, "The Second Light Center." When asked what it meant, Daniel said, "Because some people don't survive the first storm, but they deserve another dawn." The center flourished. And through it all, their family grew, not in size, but in shape, in substance, in presence. One evening, years later, Ethan, now a wiry, curious boy of 7, asked Isabella, "Was I a difficult baby?" She smiled. "No," she said. "You were just waiting for the right person to hold you." He nodded solemnly. "I'm glad it was you." That night, as Daniel tucked him in, Ethan asked, "Will I ever meet my real mom?" Daniel paused, then sat beside him. "You already have," he said gently. "She's the one who never let go." And so the story ended, not with fanfare, but with a kind of stillness that only comes after truth has been lived. A widowed man, a grieving woman, a child who refused to give up. Three people bound not by blood, but by choice. By the kind of love that isn't born in hospitals or ceremonies, but in moments of crisis, quiet, and courage. Their story didn't begin with romance. It began with survival, but it became something stronger. It became home.